In September 2005, my first wife and I, we had a wedding to go to in Ireland. In planning the trip, we realized it was just as cost effective to go with 4 people as it was with 2 to share expenses. We asked my mother-in-law if she would be interested in joining us. Her husband had passed away the previous fall, and we thought it would be a great trip for her. When it came to the 4th person, we ended up asking my mother. She instantly said yes. Ireland was one of her favorite places in the world, and she had been a number of times previously. Leading up to the trip, a lot of the comments were, "Kevin, are you crazy? Going to Ireland with your mother and your mother-in-law?" I figured, in a country where drinking is the national sport, what could go wrong? The trip was planned, and we headed over. We had a week to get from Dublin to Limerick, the area where the wedding was going to be. And for the first week, all Mom could talk about was, we need to go to Bunratty Castle, we need to do the medieval dinner, and we need to drink mead. Being the planner, I knew we would be able to get to Bunratty Castle, but there was no way we'd be able to do the dinner, as it was the same time as the wedding. After the wedding, we continued on our way. I looked at the map and realized we were close to Tipperary. With 3 hungover, tired passengers in the car, and me, we drove to Tipperary because I really wanted to see if when they said it's a long, long way to Tipperary was true or not. We got to Tipperary, there really wasn't much to see, so we kept driving to our next destination of Killarney. About a half hour outside of Killarney, we went through a little town called Rathmore, and on the main street in the town there was a pub called Cahill's. We stopped at the pub for a drink or 2, and that is when Mom started saying, "Kevin, the next time you come back to Ireland, you have to go to Bunratty Castle, you have to do the medieval dinner, and you have to drink mead." I heard that statement over and over again for the next 6 days, all the way back to Pearson Airport. Mom continued on to Ottawa, and I drove back to Guelph. 6 weeks later, Mom and Dad got on a plane, headed back to Ireland to do a seniors bus tour. 2 trips to Ireland in 2 months. She really did love the country. Their first day of traveling was to be September 15th, 2005. That day they were to be at the Bunratty Folk Park during the day, and then the medieval dinner at night. It was a warm, sunny day in Guelph. At that stage of my career, I rarely was home much before 6:30 or 7, but I decided to pack up early and head home. I walked in the door shortly after 5 to a ringing phone. I picked it up, and all I remember hearing is, "She's gone." It was my sister on the other end of the phone, telling me that she had just received a call from Dad and that Mom had had a massive heart attack and passed away. Details remain sketchy. We really didn't know what happened or where Dad was until we got a call saying that he was on his way home. He left Mom's body in Ireland to get on a plane to head back to Ottawa to be with his family. I remember when his plane landed in Ottawa. We were all there waiting for him. I remember him walking down the escalator. He looked empty, lost, sad, a part of him clearly missing. We found out that they got to the castle, they sat down, Dad looked to one side and then looked back, and Mom was gone. In September of 2008, Dad was diagnosed with cancer. And I told him to get better because we're going back to Ireland September 2010. He didn't get better. He passed away in March of 2010, but I kept the promise. A group of us, all family members, decided to carry on with the trip. And so in September 2010, we headed back to Ireland with the intention of being at Bunratty Castle for September 15th, 2010, the 5-year anniversary of Mom's passing. Before the trip, Dad's cousin, who also was on the trip with them in 2005, told us that if we could ask for Niall. He was very helpful on the trip. We didn't know what to expect. After a week of traveling in Ireland, we got to the Bunratty area on September 15th. We checked into the hotel and headed to the folk park. I got separated from my family. They turned right and I turned left, thinking that I was going to be catching up with them. Instead, I kept walking, and I walked until I met a big stone structure. It was the castle. I stood there for what seemed like forever. I didn't know what to do. I was face to face with the monster that took my mother's life. The stone structure won, and I turned away to go the other direction, tears streaming down my face. I eventually met up with my family, and we prepared and got ready to go to the medieval dinner. My aunt was in a wheelchair. We brought one along with us to help with the trip. She and I were leading the group, and we walked towards this ominous structure. It was dark, and spotlights lit up the side of the castle. There was a strange figure standing in front of the castle, no one else around. It was a bagpiper. As we got closer, he stopped. He looked at us and started to cry. That made me start to cry. And as we got closer still, he said, "You must be the Cahills." By this point, everyone was crying. You see, Niall was working the night my mother passed away. He saw our name in the reservation book and realized it had to be the same family coming back to Ireland to honor their mother. We stood outside for what seemed like forever. He recounted the specifics of that night. He led us into the castle and told us that when Mom and Dad approached, they were among the last couple to arrive, and Mom didn't look very good and was laboring as she walked up the stairs. Niall told us that he followed her up the stairs. He stood in the doorway and watched as she sat down at a long wooden bench, and as soon as she sat down, she instantly fell backwards. What we didn't know was Niall was the man who performed CPR on our mother until the paramedics arrived. Niall was able to fill in the gaps of that night. He was able to tell us where Dad was sitting and what Dad was saying. Niall told us that he kept apologizing to Dad over and over and over again for not being able to save her. And Dad kept responding, "That's okay, son. She's with God now." The paramedics arrived and took Mom to hospital. Niall drove to the hospital to be with Dad. She was officially pronounced dead upon arrival. Niall told us that he came back to the castle to tell the staff that the show and the dinner had been canceled, and it was a very somber evening. The manager of Bunratty told us that all the guests had been kept outside in another room, and we had the main dining room for as long as we wanted it to reflect. He led us in a prayer session and filled up our glasses with mead to toast Mom and her memory. Now, if you've never had mead before, it's a honey wine. It's very unique and very sweet, but Mom loved it. We took our time to compose ourselves and then gave the okay to let the crowd back into the room. The staff at Bunratty made sure we had our own server for the evening, and they never let our cups run dry. We drank mead all night long. It was a wonderful celebration of an amazing woman and her life. When we left the castle, after many hugs, we realized that we went on that trip to fill in the gaps, to fill in the pieces of the story that we didn't know. But what we didn't realize is that we would also bring comfort to a man who tried to do everything in his power to try and save Mom's life. We walked away from the castle, and almost on cue, at the end of the lane, all of us turned around to look at the castle. There was a calmness that came over us. A calmness in that, almost as if we brought Dad back to Ireland to be with Mom. Because if you knew our mother, although her body came back from Ireland, I don't think her spirit ever did. Before we turned to walk away, my cousin said, "See you in 5 years." And we all realized that yes, we would make this a tradition. What seemed like a massive loss at the time really did help to shape our future. And it does for anyone who's willing to embrace and learn from a tragedy. We know that Mom is always with us, looking over us and protecting us. The one thing that Mom never told us is that when you drink a lot of mead, it leads to a nasty hangover the next day. But to this day, that was one of the best hangovers I've ever had in my life. And to Mom, I say sláinte.